All right, good morning. It is Thursday morning, and I almost want to call it a total win because it's a constitutional win. It's a win for the rule of law. But today I want to talk about the Bill Cosby situation. It's also a win against the Me Too movement because let's be very clear, the Me Too movement was bad. Okay, there was nothing good about the Me Too movement. And I'll dig into that a little bit harder in just a minute, but Bill Cosby has been released from prison, and his sexual assault case has been thrown out. Now, I don't know, and frankly, this is part of the problem, how guilty Cosby really is of anything he's accused of. And this is the problem here. So I'm going to read you a little bit from the Fox News article on this. And frankly, guys, I went with the Fox News article on this particular case. Fox News is not your friend, as I've said many times before. Of course, all the alternatives are less your friend. Maybe more not. It's a tough call because Fox News is not your friend and pretends to be. CNN doesn't pretend to not be your enemy. Steve says Cosby did admit some guilt, and that is actually the crux of the problem, Steve. I'll dig into that in just a minute. So, Cosby was released from prison Wednesday, according to this Fox News article, after the Pennsylvania Supreme Court vacated his sexual assault conviction. Cosby, who's 83, so let's just take a moment there. Damn, son. They ain't kidding when they say the black don't crack, because 83, you're holding up a hell of a lot better than our 80-year-old frickin' former vice president, right? That's, so kudos, baby, kudos. Maybe I need to go buy me some Jell-O today. Darken up my beard. He was seen leaving the prison in a white car shortly after and arrived at his home. Fans shouting, "We love you." Protester chanting, "We believe the women," etc., etc. And Cosby later made a brief appearance outside the home wearing a t-shirt, And here's a tweet from Cosby. It says, "I have never changed my stance or my story. I have always maintained my innocence. Thank you to all my fans, supporters, and friends who stood by me through this ordeal. Special thanks to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court for upholding the rule of law." So, the thing that really turned this case is that the original prosecutor, the original authority in this case, said that the accusation, there were some problems with the accusation. One, the accuser that came forward originally accused him of having committed the crime in 2004. Didn't come out till a year later. So there's no physical evidence. There's shaky corroborating evidence. Basically, the prosecution didn't have a rock-solid case to take against Cosby. And so, District Attorney Kevin Steele at the time, I'm sorry, no, Kevin Steele's the one that later brought the case. I forget the name of the other prosecutor now, but originally they said we can't charge him criminally. We don't have a reasonable expectation of securing a conviction on the evidence at hand, and offered Cosby a deal. They basically said they basically set it up so that the woman that was accusing him could proceed to civil litigation, could go after him in civil court, where you don't have your Fifth Amendment protection, because the Fifth Amendment doesn't say, the Fifth Amendment isn't the right to remain silent. It is the right to not be compelled to give defamatory evidence against yourself. You cannot be compelled under the Fifth Amendment to incriminate yourself. Tim points out, I thought he was guilty as sin until the Kavanaugh nonsense happened. Yeah, Cosby, I don't know if Cosby gets to go in the same illustrious ranks with Brett Kavanaugh, who was obviously being smeared for political purposes, or, oh God, what's his name? Herman Cain. Herman Cain was, all of a sudden there were illicit sexual allegations against Herman Cain when he was running in the Republican primary. And all of those just evaporated as soon as they were no longer politically useful. As soon as he backed off the primary, those allegations evaporated. And if that left any doubt in anyone's mind that they were absolutely flagrant and specious, then you're not paying attention. So what happened here is when the prosecutor said, we don't have a reasonable expectation of securing a conviction against Cosby based on the evidence at hand, he made a deal with Cosby and his attorneys that said, look, we will never prosecute you for this criminally. And that was a necessary part of the deal, because once you get into civil court, you're not being charged with a crime. You don't have the same Fifth Amendment protection. However, the finding that overturned this was that Cosby, having been forced to waive his Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination, had made statements during testimony in the course of the civil case that were incriminating, and in fact were the basis of the criminal case that came later. And what happened is a new district attorney came in, that's Kevin Steele, and he brought the case against Cosby, and that violated the agreement not to charge him. So the big problem there is once that agreement was violated, it's not just that Cosby had waived his Fifth Amendment right, or he had been forced to waive his Fifth Amendment right by the civil litigation. And because of that, you can't unwaive your Fifth Amendment right going into a criminal case when the defamatory, declaratory, or incriminating, inculpatory statement has already been made. You can't untestify, right? You can recant a testimony, which is always highly suspicious, but you can't untestify. You can't not set it. And so what we see here, it's possible, it's absolutely possible that Bill Cosby is as guilty as he could possibly be in these charges. That is a real possibility. What is not, however, possible, given the circumstances of these cases, is that justice was served. So we're putting Blackstone's formulation to the test now. The proposition that it is better that 10 guilty men go free than that one innocent man suffer. This is why the law must be followed closely and correctly. Right? If the law is not followed closely and correctly, then you can end up with, let's assume for just a moment that Cosby is completely guilty. Right? For the sake of hypothetical argument, let's just go ahead and assume that Bill Cosby is the most prolific serial rapist in the history of forever. And then consider the results of this case. Because what has just happened here, assuming his absolute guilt for the sake of this argument, is that a guilty man will now go free because a corrupt and or lazy district attorney decided that it was more politically convenient or more politically useful to shortcut the law and to try and cheat his way to a high-profile conviction. Now, if they had Now, it's also true that if the evidence wasn't there to support a prosecution to begin with, then I would say it's probably likely that without Cosby giving specific testimony, evidence was not there to support the civil litigation either. And bear in mind, I said without his specific testimony. Now, in fairness, I have not done a deep enough dive into this to examine Cosby's actual testimony. I don't know exactly what he said. As I understand it, kind of bits and pieces that I picked up here and there, he basically said, I didn't ever think I did anything wrong. We were partying, we were having a good time, and then we hooked up. It sounds like Cosby's take on all of the individual allegations is that he's the Coyote Ugly. He hooked up. He and some women got drunk. They were all inebriated, right? If that's the case, it seems fair to me that Cosby should bring similar rape accusations against the women, because come on, guys. Let's be real. If my wife and I have had a few glasses of wine with dinner, that doesn't change the rest of the evening's activities because I'm afraid that our mild level of inebriation somehow equals sexual misconduct. Right? Now, that's a married couple. Fair, little different. But you're dating, right? Hypothetical. You're dating. You take a pretty girl out to dinner. You both have a few glasses of wine, take an Uber home because, okay, you're not shit-faced, but you probably aren't ready. You probably aren't good to drive. And things progress in the way that they probably should, assuming you've been careful enough to choose a dating partner that is adequate to your requirements, and you're two consenting adults. I spent several years living in California. The exact scenario I just described. Two people out on a date consensually agree, verbally. They have a conversation about it. Right? They discuss positions and kinks and safe words, and then travel to one of their private homes and engage in consensual sexual activity, having, however, consumed intoxicating adult beverages. Under California law, they are both simultaneously the victims and perpetrators of rape. Under California law, that's with one glass of wine. So if Cosby's take on it is that he was having some drinks with some friends and then he hooked up with somebody, right? As I understand a lot of the allegations, it wasn't so much he snuck drugs into my drink. It was more like he brought drugs to the party, which is a nitpicky distinction in my opinion, but legally and in the question of intent and consent, I think is probably an important detail distinction. But again, assuming that Cosby's just the worst person that ever lived, the fact of the matter is, if you do not prosecute a case correctly, then the case is open and vulnerable to being overturned in the future. So, back to Blackstone's formulation for a moment, the assertion is that it is better that 10 guilty men go free than that one innocent man suffer. Okay. What about 100 guilty men? What about 1,000? What about 1,000,000? I mean, I understand the premise. The premise is it is preferable for X number of guilty men to go free than for a single innocent man to suffer unjustly. But 10, 100, 1,000? I mean, we're quibbling over the exchange rate now. How many guilty men do we release in order to protect the one innocent man? Is it, I mean, if if I have to choose between seeing one innocent American suffer unjustly, and my option is to pick another country and genocide everybody, is one of those morally preferable? Right? Is it better that Hamas continue to operate than that they be allowed to murder one child with a rocket strike? Polytech says yes, because a guilty man will eventually get caught. That's a good take, actually. It offers a little more faith than I'm willing to offer to our law enforcement apparatus. I mean, in fairness, I have a generally low opinion of our current law enforcement apparatus. They're ill-informed and ill-prepared to the task they want to do, that we want them to do, rather. But a guilty man will eventually get caught. Maybe. But how many guilty men running around? I mean, okay, Alex, there's a point at which even the most competent law enforcement apparatus can be overwhelmed with the number of guilty men who are out there doing their guilty acts. Krista says the man that molested me lived to a ripe old age without ever getting caught. With millions of criminals wandering around anyway, what's 1,000 more of an innocent fellow stays free? Okay, see, 1,000, that's not bad. That's not, what about 1,000,000? The point, Alex, is that when you start arguing the numbers, eventually the argument gets to, if the law is imperfect, then no one should be punished for crimes, full stop. Which is certainly not where I'm going with the argument. And I don't know the answer. Maybe there's a solid algorithmic analysis that can be paired against it. But you know, for example, we've talked several times recently on the show about murder solve rates. Nationally, the solve rate for murder is just above 50%. It fluctuates year over year between about 53 and 56%. So, in the United States of America, and that's the U.S. The U.S. has one of the best murder solve rates in the world, right? And partially because we have one of the lowest murder rates in the world, believe it or not. We have individual cities that have among the highest murder rates in the world, but the country at large has some of the lowest murder rates globally. That includes gun violence, by the way, without you counting your bullshit suicide statistics and amongst the gang crimes. There's always been the option of justice outside of the courts. Maybe that should be more common. Alex, that will be the result. That will be the inevitable result of defunding the police. And I will, for the sake of the retaining of my YouTube channel, pretend like I'm not sexually excited by that proposition. So, I may have exhausted my analysis on this and have gotten to talking in circles already. 20 minutes. Not bad for a solo man on one story. Anyway, so when you look at the Cosby situation, it's also kind of a middle finger to the Me Too group. And I'm gonna wrap up on this and get out of here. The Me Too occurrence. I have said many times, and I will continue to say this, Me Too was a travesty. It was grotesque. Because what you had in Me Too, the publicity of it, the public-facing image of it was that these women are so brave, they're standing forward against their attackers and finding justice for women. Bullshit. Now, this is not a defense of men who commit egregious crimes. Rapists, pedophiles. No. But think back on the women who came forward and made accusations as part of the Me Too movement. Now, it may be that there were some women, although I haven't seen any good evidence of it, who had legitimate, reasonable accusations, who were emboldened by the Me Too movement, and actually found justice against a legitimate, wicked criminal who may otherwise have escaped justice. But, of course, Harvey Weinstein was the most famous target of the Me Too movement. And I'm not defending Weinstein for what he did. It is, two things can be true at the same time. Weinstein can be a disgusting, corrupt, vulgar human being that engaged in activity that I find morally repugnant. And it can also be true that the women who sold their bodies to him for the payment of fame and fortune are whores who I find morally repugnant. These women were not taken advantage of. They took a commodity which is wholly theirs because we own ourselves, we are each our own property, and they decided to trade on that commodity. Later, they regretted that trade. If I sell you my car for not enough money, I don't get to just come and take it back. Now, if I come and offer to give you back the money you paid me for the car that I now want back, and you agree to that, that's a consensual arrangement. That's a reasonable arrangement. But when I wake up the next morning and realize I need a car to get to work, and my dumbass just sold it to somebody for not enough money to replace it, that doesn't make the guy that got the good deal on my car a criminal. We entered into a consensual, mercantile trade arrangement. Dad says there are no innocent people near a crime. There may be people committing other crime. I don't want to dig into that one I don't want to dig into that one now because I've only got about 5 minutes left on the show this morning, Dad, but we'll be talking about the drug war thing again in the future. And I've often made the argument that law causes crime. I am a big fan of the rule of law, but the law, which is the rule, should be as simple and direct and clear as possible, right? When you have arbitrary laws, they create crime. For example, the drug war, right? By making the substances illegal, you create a black market, which is necessarily and always will be surrounded by additional crimes, right? You've got a black market, you've got illicit substances, but you still have a supply and a demand. People want the product. As long as there's a demand, supply will rise to meet it. As long as the supply is rising to meet the demand in an illicit market, there will be actions taken to defend that market. This is true of legal products as well. The difference is, when you talk about the trade routes for perfectly legal and available substances, it is the military, it is the national forces, it is the law which deploys violence weapons to defend those trade routes and protect those supply lines. When you have an illicit substance, a criminalized substance, a controlled substance, the supply lines exist, the logistics exist, and those will be defended with violence and weapons and armed men in the same way that we defend legal products as they cross the world, as they move through dangerous places, as they're targeted by people who want to disrupt those chains of supply. And while it may now be criminal activity because it's being done by not the government, it is the same activity. The defense of the supply line, the protection of the product, right, for the purpose of supplying the existing market demand. Law causes crime. Now, that is not to say that all crimes are caused by law, but all law does cause additional crime. Right, here's an extreme example. Without defending murder as a moral activity, hypothetically, if there were not laws against murder, there would not be a black market for assassins. Now, that's not to say that murder should be legal. That's an extreme example to illustrate the point. But if murder were not a crime, there is an active demand for that activity, and the supply would rise to meet it. In fact, the supply would probably be met by a government agency. Oh, wait, it is! What do you know? So, with that, I think I'll rest my case on the Cosby situation. We don't know that Cosby is absolutely guilty of doing something wrong. We can infer pretty reasonably that Cosby is guilty of having made some poor choices and become entangled with some questionable activity. But that by no means guarantees his actual guilt in the accusation of sexual assault or rape. Right? Sexual assault and rape are very different things than I slept with somebody I regretted. Men don't get that. I mean, many of us understand it, but we don't have it as an option. When you wake up in the morning and you look to your left and you were so drunk last night that you brought home a 4, and you have to chew your arm off because you're afraid she'll wake up and catch you before you can leave, nobody's going to take you seriously when you say she raped you. That's a double standard. Alex says, if you're famous, avoid groupies at all costs. Absolutely. And on that note, I'm going to close the show out. Thanks for watching, guys. Tomorrow's Firearms Friday, and we will see you then. Be good. Be safe.